So it comes from John chapter 4, verse 1 through 14. So let me give a brief intro about the book of John. And I mentioned this in our QT book. And, John is one of my favorite gospels is because I think the way that it was written is very unique, right? So, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, although Matthew was Jesus' disciples, Jesus had 12 disciples, and then within the 12, there was 3 close disciples, right? Peter, Andrew, and John, right? Okay. So John, the way that he kind of writes, a lot of biblical scholars talks about this, where when he writes his gospel, it's a little bit more intimate, right? Because he is able to see the inner of Jesus and inner side of Jesus, right? And a lot of intimate, close, like a one-on-one encounters with Jesus is actually recorded in John that are not recorded in the other 3 gospels. So John is very unique in that way, where he was involved in events and different things where other disciples were not involved in, right? So, I love that kind of language that John is kind of portraying, right? It's this kind of like he was Jesus' one of closest friend, right? It was Jesus' kind of like inner circle, right? In a way, not that Jesus showed favoritism, but, you see Peter, Andrew, and John kind of being the closest to Jesus in a way, right? So in the way, I think that's very unique for John. If you actually, this is not in the passage, but I would like to just start off by saying this. If you go to the next slide for me. If you look at John 20, chapter 20, so today it's not the passage, it's much later on, but I just want to give a little bit of framework, right? John is very intentionally writing this book, right? And then in chapter 20, he basically titles that passage saying the purpose of this book, okay? So what John is doing is he's building this kind of like this case where Jesus is the Messiah, Jesus is the Christ, and Jesus is a Son of God. And all the events and all the claims and all the stories, actually, he's kind of like presenting that case before the audience, and then he's kind of like supporting that evidence, right? But then he does something very interesting is at the end of this book, in John chapter 20, he writes this section where he says, the purpose of this book. Okay, so he's very clear to the readers about why he's writing this book and what purpose he wants to get out of from this book. So this is what he says, right? He says, John 20, verse 31, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Okay, so what John is basically saying is, hey, don't miss the main point. Out of all these stories and all these incidents, all these events, and through all these I am statements, at the end, John is saying, don't miss this, okay? This is the reason why I'm writing this book. And if you actually see the structure of John's gospel is he's supporting this statement, right? So in the beginning, you see in the chapter 1 through 3, you see all these claims they're making about Jesus, right? He's the Lamb of God. He's the deliverer. He's the Messiah, right? And then what does people do? They respond to that, right? They believe and they follow, right? So I think what John is trying to do with this book is to say, Jesus is the Christ. Jesus is the Son of God. Now, he says, so that you may believe, right? So he's trying to get some kind of response out of you, right? So for, I think, a lot of us, right, we cannot just say that, Jesus is the Messiah, okay, he's the Son of God, and have no kind of response to you, right? It demands a response. Right? It demands some kind of response, whether you believe, you follow him, you give your life to him, right? So that's the part of John's gospel, right? And, John chapter 21 is one of my favorite, passage at all. But I just want to give them as a framework, okay? Where John is so clear about the purpose why he's writing this book, right? And the title of this passage, once again, in John chapter 20 is that so that what? Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. All right, so that's the purpose of John's book. Okay, and that's the reason why he's writing this book. So having that framework kind of gives us, good. So let's look at today's passage. It's actually interesting because it records, once again, Jesus' one-on-one interaction, right? And I just want to give you guys one interesting thought is, John starts off his gospel saying, in the beginning, right? There was word, right? And it kind of talks about it like kind of like the structure is like in the beginning, right? And the way that's kind of similar is like back in Genesis, right? It says in the beginning, right? So John kind of brings it all the way back to Genesis, where other gospels, he kind of starts with the birth of Jesus, like a nativity story, right? But John starts off his book by kind of similar structure as the Genesis, right? To say that Jesus was from the beginning, that Jesus was there before all, right? So what really kind of like, as I was reflecting this, what is kind of like mind-boggling for me is that God of eternity, right? Jesus who was there from the beginning of creation, right? Jesus who was there, who saw the earth like being void and formless. He came down in flesh form, and then he's talking to this Samaritan woman. Like, that just blows my mind, right? And I've been emphasizing that in our young adults group. Like, that blows my mind that God of eternity, who was there beginning of creation of this world, is talking to this woman at the well, right? Just think about that, right? Just the magnitude of that magnitude of that truth, right? So here, let me just break it down. So here's a very interesting idea. So just to give a little bit of a summary, Jesus is tired from the journey. He's at the well, and the Samaritan woman comes along, right? And Jesus is having a conversation, okay? Now, I'm not going to go too much into details, but if you can go to the next slide for me. All right, there's something very kind of interesting about this passage. So let me just point out 4 things, and then we'll kind of dive into it. Okay, number 1, okay, Jesus is talking. Jesus as a Jew, right, talking to a Samaritan. Okay, that itself was a shocker. Okay, and I'm not going to get too much into the history of it, but the Jews and the Samaritans have a very deep racial conflict. Right? Because one way the Jewish people kind of view the Samaritans were they were like dogs. They were like a mixed breed, right? And what happened was they're the type of people that were married to with the other cultures and things like that. And so Jews, they looked at Samaritans as like dogs. Okay? And there's also kind of like another, very kind of like deep, conflict where, and you will see later on by this woman talking is they did a lot of like idol worship, right? So the Jews did not believe in the idol worship. So they built their temples in the mountains, and what they would do is they would do a lot of idol worship there. So, there was a lot of conflict, okay? Number 2, it was a Samaritan woman. Okay, so not that it's right, but the context, the cultural context of it is back in the day, men, especially a rabbi, okay, because it was a man kind of like a front society, men usually don't talk to a woman, especially a Samaritan woman, okay? But more than that, men usually does not ask for a favor from women back in the day, okay? I'm not saying that's right, just culturally back in the day, okay? So Jesus here, right, as a Jew, as a rabbi, right, approaches this woman and says, "Will you give me a drink?" Okay, so there's a little bit of cultural shock here, okay? Number 3, which is a little bit interesting, is this woman comes to draw water at noon, which is one of the hottest times of the day, right? So usually back in the day, on the cultural setting, the woman will come to draw the water early in the morning, okay, before the sunrise. Okay? And this woman comes to draw the water at noon. So we know that maybe there's something that maybe she might be a social outcast, so something is hiding her. Here's an interesting thing that a biblical scholar said. Like my mom, when she goes to barbershop, okay, disclaimer, okay? I know this is on the recording, but my mom, I used to follow her to the barbershop, right? And it was the most talkative environment I've ever seen in my life, right? Nails, like hair, like all this type of things, right? Like I hate being there, right? It's like it's it's kind of like a Korean woman social club, right? It's kind of like they talk a lot there, and then the problem is they also gossip a lot there too, right? So as a young in middle school, I remember following her, and I was kind of like on my Game Boy. But even though I didn't fully understand what they're saying, but a lot of times I could kind of understand that they were gossiping. A lot of, not that, I mean, my mom is a good person, but it's an area for gossip, right? In the similar case back in the day, the woman will come to draw the water, right, early in the morning, and it would be like kind of like a center of gossip. Like it's like, hey, like did you hear so and so? Did you hear so and so? Right? So as they're drawing water, they will actually gossip with one another, right? And I guarantee you, this woman's name was probably mentioned. Okay, that's probably the reason why she's coming at noon, because she doesn't want to be seen. She doesn't want to interact. And we know why later on that's the case, right? This woman had 5 husbands, and the one that's living with her, right, is not her husband. Okay? So there's a little bit of that hiddenness in her, that brokenness, that shame that is part of her, right? And lastly, it's very interesting also. This is very theologically shocking because Jesus offers gift of salvation to her, and we'll get into that, right? And here's the reason why that's shocking. Because for back in the day, the Jewish idea of Messiah and deliverer was he came for Israel, to deliver specifically the Israel, right? But here's something that Jesus does is he extends his deliverance and his gift outside of the people of Israel, which is Samaritans, right? Which is unthinkable in a way, right? So let's go to the next slide. So there's, for this woman, right, to know the God, there's all these barriers, right? So let me just kind of quickly, so there's a racial barrier, right? For being a Samaritan, right? Being a Samaritan. There's a social barrier, right? For being a woman, right? And for being a woman and, wanting to, hide something, right? There's also, I just want to highlight this, there's a relational and spiritual barrier about this woman as well. Right? So, maybe she's looking for something. There's a lot of failure in her relationships, with other men and things like that. So there's all this. There's also number 4, a cultural barrier. And it's not specifically in this passage, but if you look at the passage after, right, Jesus and Samaritan woman has a discussion about worship, and their perspective of worship is different, right? She says, our fathers, we worship on this mountain, and Jesus says, no longer, you have to go here and there, right? So there's a cultural difference between the two, right? And then it's interesting because Jesus offers himself as the answer to this woman. Right? So as I was reflecting this, right, I think many times we ourselves can see ourselves as that Samaritan woman, right? And that's something that I was kind of like, the Lord was kind of revealing to me is, we have all these barriers, right? When we come before the Lord, right? We might have a relational barrier, spiritual barrier, like circumstances, financial barriers, like we have all these barriers, right? And if you look at the first point, can we just go to the first point is, I think what really signifies in this is that there was no barrier. There are no barriers for Jesus, right? So can we just go to the next slide for me? Yep. Yep. There are no barriers for Jesus, okay? So what Jesus does is, this woman, right, who cannot really come to the Lord, right, who cannot really encounter Jesus and the Messiah because of all these circumstances, right? Jesus initiates the conversation, right, and Jesus meets her, right, in that place. This is very similar to that passage, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave, he initiated it first. Right? So in this passage, what you see is Jesus initiating to this woman first. And many times we feel that way, right? When we come to church, there's all these barriers that might stop us from fully engaging with the Lord, right? But then what this story tells us that Jesus is the one who actually reaches out first, right? Jesus is the one who actually initiates first, okay? And number 2, Jesus meets us where we are. Okay, so once again, there's this idea, right, where, this well, it's kind of like a normal day for her, right, where she's coming to this well, she's just doing kind of the normal thing, right, and Jesus is there, right, and meets her where she is. Let me give you guys one quick side point about this. I gave a sermon last Sunday about finding Jesus in your ordinary life. And what I mean by that is we just had 2 successful retreats, right? So we had an EM retreat and we had a youth retreat, and the kids were really blessed, right? And I told them this. I said, if you're constantly looking for that spiritual like hype experience, right? And if you're constantly looking for that, to encounter God in that big conferences, right? Then you're not really spiritually going to grow. Right? You have to learn to encounter God in our everyday life, right? So for our young adults, one thing that I shared was, I pray that this 2025, that whether you're picking up your kids, whether you're at school, whether you're early in the morning for 30 minutes doing your QT, I pray that wherever you are, that you will meet Jesus, right? That's what's going to make us really spiritually grow and our spiritual walk, really strong is the fact that we meet Jesus where we are, right? Whether it's our house, whether it's at church, right? Whether it's at, our driving, right? So I think one thing that's important for us to understand is it just like this passage, Jesus meets us where we are, right? Let's go to the next one. Okay. Jesus is the living water. All right. So this woman comes, and then just the backstory is just this woman comes, and there's something in her, right, that she's looking for, right, that she's trying to fill her soul with, right, and then Jesus, knowing her past, offers the living water, right? Let me go to the next slide real quick, and I just want to cover this real quick. Okay, so water has different meanings, okay? So Pastor Cho talked about the baptism of water, which is the cleansing of sin, right? But in the biblical sense, there is a different symbolic meaning to the water. So there is a cleansing, right? We're cleansing from our sin. But in this case, what Jesus is talking about the satisfaction. So the water, when your soul is thirsty, it brings refreshment, right? It brings life, right? So it talks about how, as Jesus offers the water, it brings that life, that renewal, right? That refreshment, that satisfaction that can only be found in Jesus. Right? So in this case, right, Jesus offers saying that, hey, you've been searching for something, you've been longing for something, and I'm the answer, right? And Jesus offers himself as the living water. Okay? Let me just read this passage, Isaiah 58, verse 11. If you just could go to that. I'm just going to quickly read this. It says, the Lord will guide you and continually satisfy your desires in scorched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a water garden, like a spring of water whose water do not fail, right? So it talks about that promise that once we follow Jesus, there's that satisfaction that he brings, right? There's the joy and the satisfaction that can be found in him, okay? Let me share a quick story, and this is for young people, for EM members. So let me just quickly share. When I became a pastor in my early 20s, my Fridays and my Saturdays and my Sundays were just always with the youth kids, right? Always driving them, always buying them food, and always hanging out with them. So I had a lot of high school friends who are not believers, right? And I remember every time we meet, my high school friends will ask me this. He says, what are you doing with your life, man? Right? What are you doing with your life? It's like you should be out there, like meeting people, like doing things. Like you should be, some of them drink a lot, right? So like, you should be go out there drinking, have fun and things like that. Like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you look like a loser, right? In a way, right? Like you drive the church van, right? And then you're like picking up the kids and the parents are like yelling at you and the kids are like, you're yelling at the kids. And at the end of the day, they don't appreciate anything that you do. And you're broke all the time because you're buying them food. And it's like this idea, right? They were, my friend was kind of like making fun of me, saying, "What are you doing with your life, man? Right? You're wasting your 20s." And then I look at their life, and they're like, having fun, all this type of things. And then I remember every night, and I just want to say this to the young people as well. Every night I would drop the kids off and come home, right, alone, right? I remember just feeling this deep satisfaction and joy. Right? Like that the world cannot really give, right? This deep satisfaction and joy saying that, oh my goodness, like I am loving the Lord. Like I'm doing something significant with my life, right? Like I cannot describe it, but there was this deep satisfaction that I felt from the Lord, from serving the Lord, right? And that's something that I would never able to describe it to my unbelieving friends, right? But then I remember just feeling that, just deep gratitude and deep satisfaction before the Lord, right? And I just want to say this to you guys, right? Following Jesus, okay? We don't just follow Jesus empty-hearted, okay? Jesus offers living water. Jesus offers life. And it's the best one that you'll ever get when you follow Jesus, right? So when you follow him, there's this deep satisfaction, deep joy and gratitude and something eternal that the world cannot give it to you, right? And it's never a waste, right? Just like this woman, right? Looking for something to satisfy her in every other places, right? And this is what we do. We come to the well every single day, right? Every season of our lives. If Jesus is not your answer, you're constantly searching, just like this woman. You're constantly trying to draw water from somewhere else. And then what does Jesus say? Jesus says, whoever drinks the water that I give him will never thirst. Right? It's a promise. There's a guarantee that in Jesus, there's this deep satisfaction and joy and reward that the world cannot give to you. So I want to just challenge you young people here, right? To serve the Lord, to find your satisfaction and your joy and your everything in Jesus. All right? That's my charge and encouragement, right? Give your teenage years, give your 20s, and give your young years to the Lord, and you'll never regret it. All right? So let me just end with this 3 point. Okay. Number 1, there are no barriers for Jesus. Okay? He's the one who initiates. He's the one who came down. The Word became flesh. He's the one who became us, one of us. He is with us. He's the one who initiated it. Okay? Number 2, Jesus meets us where we are. All right? So those of you who feel like you're ashamed or you're broken, right? Jesus meets you where you are. Right? Just like this woman, right? Jesus didn't expect, this woman to change or things like that, right? It's like Jesus meets us exactly as we are, right? And number 3, Jesus is the foundation and the ultimate source of all life. Okay? So let's bow our heads. I just want to talk to the EM members real quick. I know that we have a lot of young adults here and a lot of, youth here, okay? There is a satisfaction and joy that is beyond this world that only Jesus can give to you, okay? And it's far better than anything that this world can offer, okay? If you want to live your best life now, give your life to Jesus, right? Make him the center of everything that you do, okay? So let's just do this right now. I just want to encourage, since this is our first kind of 2025, If you see like a young adults and youth around you, can we just go around them and can we just take some time to pray for our young adults and our youth members? So can we just all stand and I just, I know it's not normal, but we have a few young adults and few youth and children here. Can we just go lay our hands on them real quick and can we just spend some time in prayer for them?